Thank you for being here today. And first, let me just start by saying how much we appreciate your service to the students in BYU-Pathway. The program has generated a lot of interest from other parts of the country and even all around the world, and people sometimes come look at the design of the program, look at what we do, and there are certainly some things that could be replicated, but one thing that can't be replicated is the missionaries who serve all across the church. There's over 2,500 missionaries who serve in BYU-Pathway in the Pathway Connect program, everywhere from headquarters in Salt Lake to every cohort all across the church. Some of them are called full-time missionaries, but most of them are church service missionaries. Like I think all of you church service missionaries, and they do it from home. And I have an aunt who's a Pathway missionary in Kaysville. I have an uncle and aunt who were Pathway missionaries in Texas. I have in-laws who are serving in St. George. And one of the most common things we hear is I'll have Pathway missionaries come up to me and say, "You tell my stake president not to release us." And we know you pour so much into the lives of these students, and what a great place to serve and a powerful impact you're having on the church, not just on the individual students, but on the church itself through your service. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about BYU Pathway and how it's different, and I'm going to introduce two words to you that really shape how we think about BYU Pathway, but they're really distinctive words. The first is the word mission. What's the mission of BYU Pathway? And the second word is strategy. And the strategy, I hope as we go through this discussion, you're going to see is very unique for BYU Pathway, especially when compared to the traditional universities in the church educational system. So let me start out with the mission. BYU Pathway Worldwide was founded and is supported and guided by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is not my program or Elder Clark's program or one of our curriculum designers' program. This is the program of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Its mission is to develop disciples of Jesus Christ who are leaders in their homes, the church, and their communities. Now, up until this point, every word I just read is word for word the same mission as BYU Idaho, and very similar language to the other church schools in the church educational system. We are trying to create disciples of the Savior who can lead in their homes, the church, and their communities. That is a unifying mission of the entire church educational system. But how we do it and for whom we do it in BYU Pathway is very distinct. And I want to start to get us thinking about that, and we'll see how that shapes the way we run our programs, the way our curriculum is structured, and the very design of the Pathway Connect program itself. I want to share a quote with you first from Elder Clark about who we serve in BYU Pathway, which is very different than the students we serve here on this campus of BYU Idaho or anywhere around the church. Elder Clark said, "The Lord has put BYU Pathway on the earth to open up those opportunities for our brothers and sisters who have been educationally invisible for a long time. Many of them fear they cannot do the work of higher education. Many of them see the cost of education as a huge barrier. Many of them have been told all their lives that education and learning is not for them. Many of them have believed that false doctrine until now." Now I'm going to share a clip where Elder Clark talks about these, what I'll call the hidden many, these students who are invisible, at least educationally across the church. Let's watch that and then we'll have a short discussion.
After the Pathway program had been running for a year or so, the missionaries at the Mesa, Arizona site declared, "This program will never work. There is little interest in it, and the priesthood leaders don't support it." And in fact, The priesthood leaders did not support it because they saw little need for it. There seemed to be many opportunities for education of their young people right there in the valley, and of course there was BYU. Now hold that thought as I tell you the second story. This one I experienced personally. It took place in Washington, D.C. a couple of years later. One of the Area 70s there said to me, "We don't need Pathway here. We have a great scholarship program with Southern Virginia University that works fine." I asked him, "Well, how many students are involved in that program?" His answer, "About 25. I then asked, "Do you have any young adults in your area who are struggling in their lives, who are not making progress?" He said, "Oh, yes, there are thousands of them." My response, "Pathway is for them." He looked at me in surprise and he said, "Oh, I didn't see it that way." In both of these cases, and in many others we encountered in the early days, the people we sought to reach with Pathway were simply invisible to the leaders, at least as far as higher education was concerned. We were after those who had never been to college or who had been but were no longer attending. Many of them were struggling in their lives, both spiritually and temporally. One of the wonderful things BYU-Pathway has done is to open the opportunity for education to those who have been invisible, who believed that education, especially a church education, was for someone else, not for them, who had little hope for a better future. We live in a day of miracles when our Heavenly Father and His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, are moving with power in the earth to build up the kingdom of God and establish Zion in preparation for the second coming of Jesus Christ. I believe BYU Pathway is one of those miracles. It has a role to play in strengthening the kingdom of God and establishing Zion.
All right. Now, we're going to come back to Elder Clark's message here throughout this discussion, but I want to just have you think with me for a minute about these invisible or what we often call the hidden many in the church. And I saw, as we watched that clip from Elder Clark, I saw several of you nodding your heads as if this resonated with you. Why would many of these students that Elder Clark described be hidden, at least educationally, from so many of the priesthood leaders? And not just priesthood, but ministering brothers and sisters and Relief Society presidents. Why would they be hidden from leaders in the church? What do you think? Just raise your hand and share some thoughts. Yeah. And Brother Thompson, Elder Thompson.
I've noticed, or Sister Thompson, I've noticed that a lot of them want to be hidden. They're embarrassed. Interesting.
So they want, and this is a great insight. They don't want to be known, and there's some stigma and maybe a little bit of embarrassment that they aren't educated. Okay? And that keeps them from even raising their hand and saying, I could use some help.
I've been a lifelong educator, and that's what you see, because they don't have confidence in themselves.
That's right. That's right. Great. So why else? That's just a great insight. Is one of the challenges is the very people who we want to make visible sometimes don't want to be visible. Yeah. Sister Hansi, sorry.
I think a lot of them, because possibly of this stigma or embarrassment, are inactive also, and not visible physically. They're not there.
So they're not there. So they're not at church. They're not coming, right? And one of the miracles of BYU Pathway is that it's not just a path to education. In many cases, it's a path back to the church, right? And they come in and they feel the Spirit in a Pathway gathering. They see the fruits of the gospel lived, and they realize, hey, there's something here for me. So I think that's great. Other thoughts? Yes, Sister Robertson.
Some of them are already in other avenues of life, like mothers.
Yes. So I'm gonna just put a general title here that says they're adult learners, which could mean a whole bunch of things. They might be working full time. They might be parenting full time. And there's really two things. One is it may be like, well, they're busy, right? They've got a job. They're at home with their children. Another one may be, well, they're 35. I thought college was for 18 to 24-year-olds, right? And what's the, by the way, does anyone know the median age of a BYU Pathway student around the world? Mid-30s. 31 is the median, and the average is 34, which means we have some older students pulling the average up even higher, right? So this, and if you're a priesthood leader or a Relief Society president or a ministering brother and sister, and you're working with someone who's 35 and underemployed or working in a job that's not well or lacking confidence because they don't have an education, you might not think, oh, let's send them back to campus, right? And by the way, we aren't going to send them back to campus. We're going to send them to BYU Pathway. But that model of what a college-age student is blocks us from seeing a lot of them. Yes, and give me your name. Sister Perks.
I think, too, we have those people that have divorced.
Yes.
And we have those people that thought they should have gone on a mission. And so they've hidden themselves away in those two places.
So I'm going to put life challenges, which is probably tied to the idea that they're not there and maybe tied to the stigma. But there's some people who are divorced who left school early in a marriage, weren't well educated. Now, later in life, they need an education. There's some people who didn't go on a mission. And by the way, when we talk about less active members, think about the 18, 19-year-old young man who didn't go on a mission. And he comes to his home ward every week. And they say, Johnny, are you headed on your mission? No. Oh, are you headed up to BYU, Idaho? No. Oh, are you going to the institute and at the local university? No. And Johnny just gets done answering that, and he runs into another person who leads him through the same set of questions over and over again. Pretty soon, Johnny doesn't want to come to church on Sunday, right? And suddenly, Pathway opens a door that says, hey, Johnny, have you thought about BYU Pathway? And next week, someone says, Johnny, what are you doing right now? And he says, I'm going to BYU Pathway. And the whole countenance and continence changes, right? But we have these people in these holding patterns, and Pathway is such a wonderful answer to them, but we might not think of it immediately. Yes, Sister Parkinson.
The financial burden
of
some of these kids keep them out of education.
And that can work both ways. So part of what some of the things that keep us from here, Elder Thompson said, some of them want to be hidden. And so we don't find them. And some of the times it's because the church leadership and ministering brothers and sisters don't see them. But you're saying, you're adding to this argument that the ones who don't want to be hidden may say, well, I can't afford this, right? And as we know, BYU Pathway is so much more affordable than anything else out there. But a lot of people don't know that going in. And when they hear education, they're like, yeah. You want me to stop my job? I can't do that. You want me to pay out a lot of money? I can't do that. And when they don't realize that BYU Pathway is a third of the most affordable community colleges, right? But that keeps them, and sometimes those who work with them, from thinking intuitively. So whether it's age or life situation or fear, both the student and those around them sometimes don't see them as educationally visible. Now, let's go to this idea of serving the hidden many. 45% of the U.S. church has some degree. ranging from technical degrees to associate's degrees to bachelor's degrees. Is that higher or lower than you would have thought? Higher than you would have thought? Yeah. Some people tell me, well, I think it's like 70%, because they're in a ward where everyone in the ward has a college degree. But when you start to look at this list of the hidden many that you just walked me through, they realize, oh yeah, I see. But over half the U.S. church doesn't have any college degree of any form. By the way, that number jumps precipitously when you go to the international church. We estimate it's about 85% or more of the international church doesn't have a college degree. Another 15% of the church in the United States have some college, but no degree. We call these stop-outs. So they started college and they stopped. And a lot of times, by the way, the higher educational system will say, well, yeah, they weren't gritty enough and they didn't work hard enough. I'm going to show you some data as we go through here where I believe actually the higher education system failed them because it wasn't designed especially for this type of student. Okay, and then another 40% never even went to college. These are the truly invisible, the true hidden many, where they just said, I didn't think I could do it. No one encouraged them to go. They didn't have an older brother or a mom and dad who went. When they got to high school, they just thought this wasn't an opportunity for them. Now, this group in the gold colors here, we call the hidden many. This is who BYU-Pathway was designed to serve. We aren't serving an overflow from any of the church campuses. We're serving students who didn't think they could go to college, right? That's a choice. Remember a minute ago I said a strategy is different than a mission. Our mission is to educate disciples of Jesus, develop disciples of Jesus Christ who can be leaders in their home, the church, and their families. That mission's identical to BYU Idaho and many of the church campuses. But the strategy starts with a choice. It's very different. And the choice was, we are going to be built. And every decision we make inside of BYU Pathway is to serve that population. Right? And that's going to lead to some very different choices, as you'll see in a minute. Now, another choice, and look at the growth that's happened to BYU Pathway by deliberately focusing on the hidden many. You can see the top line is BYU. That dip, anyone know what that blue line dip is? The mission age change, right? BYU Idaho almost grew right through that dip because it had open and expanding enrollment. Okay? But the green line is BYU Pathway. And if you think that's a lot of students, there's more students in BYU Pathway than any other church school. And if you think that's a lot of students, it's not even the start of where this will go. BYU Pathway will fill the entire church for two reasons. One is we're serving the hidden many, which is over half the church, right? So we're the only institution in the church educational system that was built and designed to serve that need. The second reason is we operate everywhere the church is organized. This is a map of pathway sites around the world. So here we are today in eastern Idaho, and you can see in that clump of increasingly dense gold circles around the world, eastern Idaho with pathway sites here. But pathway sites are everywhere the church is organized. This is just a heat map of the church, right? And with over 40,000 students, this year will be closer to 50,000 students in over 100 countries. BYU Pathway is built to operate wherever the church is organized. At the inauguration, I said this to President Nelson. Counsel from the Church Board of Education suggested that because BYU Pathway needed to operate wherever the church is organized, its focus would be on access and not a full-service university. And I'm going to just pause there for a second. There is a real temptation, having come out of another university and working with people in another university, to want to look like that university. But this program had to focus on what? What's the word I used? Access. Okay? And I want you to think about how that's different than a traditional university. In other words, while education remains a religious priority, it is also a personal responsibility. The church will help you jumpstart your path, but it won't pave every possible road. Now, I hope you're already seeing how this means we aren't going to offer every degree. We are going to focus on certificates that stack into a limited number of high-quality, highly applicable degrees. Now, I said strategy is different than a mission. Strategy is about choice. And the relationship between the choices you make and the systems and activities you build around those choices. I've introduced to you 2 choices today that we made, and not just on our own, but the Church Board of Education helped make for us in the creation of BYU-Pathway. What were those 2 choices? Who's the student? The hidden many. Okay, so the first choice, when we say BYU-Pathway Worldwide Strategy, the first choice is we're going to serve the hidden many. This is distinctive from the rest of the church educational system. We weren't built for students who were choosing between BYU-Pathway and another college. We were built for people who weren't thinking college was a possibility. Okay? What was the second distinctive choice we've been talking about? Where would BYU-Pathway operate? Wherever the church is organized. Okay? Those 2 choices are going to shape a lot of things you see every day in the program. But we wanted to spend some time to help you realize where they come from. They're not just random ideas or plans that we've put into the program. They stem out of these 2 choices. Okay? So if you're going to serve the hidden many, as was mentioned just a minute ago, we need to be affordable, both for the student and for the church. And if you're going to be affordable, what does BYU-Pathway do that makes it way more affordable to the student and to the church that you might not see in a traditional university? What makes it less expensive? 2,500 missionaries serving and lifting the students. And while we might not do that for students who had always planned to go to college, we do that to lift our brothers and sisters who hadn't. So missionaries are a big part of that strategy. What else? No campuses. We are leveraging an infrastructure of buildings all across the church that were built long before the Pathway program showed up. And not only do we have the buildings, what's inside the buildings? Internet access, which in some areas is we can't run the program without the Wi-Fi in buildings across the church. What else do you do to make it affordable? No buildings, therefore how are we teaching? Online, right? The online cost of delivery is dramatically less expensive than teaching in a classroom. Like we're in a classroom here on the campus of BYU Idaho right now. And BYU Idaho uses its resources better than almost any university I know. But they still aren't utilized all day, all night, all year. An online course is always on. And if a student is working, they can come in at any time and do the course. They don't have to be there at a certain time. So online learning, missionary couples, online instructors, no physical buildings, all of these things help us be more affordable. If you're going to serve the hidden many, as was mentioned earlier, you need to be applied. What are some manifestations of an applied curriculum in BYU Pathway? What would be some things that would signal to you that the curriculum is more applied than many university curricula?
Student success after they matriculate.
Okay, so you'd probably really focus on job placement. You might even focus on immediate job placement. In the new curriculum, we've actually embedded the math and the writing all the way through all 3 courses. So the first semester is life skills just like before. The second semester is now going to be called professional skills. And the third semester is called university skills. And the math is embedded all the way through. You actually work on the math for 3 semesters. The English is embedded all the way through, right? The goal, though, is to not just give you a math program so you can just work on equation rationalization. The goal is to show you quantitative reasoning helps you think. And instead of just doing an algebraic substitution, we ask the students to calculate the lifetime earning difference of getting a job and not having a job out of a certificate, right? And instead of just having them do a narrative essay, they'll be writing a cover letter to apply for a job. So the curriculum has to be applicable. Then once you matriculate, what do we start with? What's the first courses they take after Pathway Connect? Certificates. Now, we've actually fully implemented this internationally. Domestic is slowly catching up. This fall, we'll see an acceleration of that. But I want to talk in a minute why we start with a certificate. But I'm going to go deep on that one, so I'm going to leave it for now. So if you're going to serve the hidden many, though, you need to have a curriculum that's applicable. If you're going to operate wherever the church is organized, you have to be scalable. We can't do things in Pathway that work in Idaho only, or work in Utah only. If it doesn't work everywhere the church is organized, we're not going to offer it. If we can't do it over and over and over for 50,000 students to keep it affordable and applicable and scalable, we're going to have to find a way to do it differently. That ranges from advising services to our automated grad planner that we'll release this fall. We have to do things in BYU Pathway that work over and over and over again. Okay, the Pathway gathering worked over and over and over again up until what constraint did we hit? Enough people to have a gathering, and in some cases, too far away. We were all excited about 500 Pathway sites all across the church until we realized that only reached a certain percentage of the church. This fall, 1/3 of the students will be in a virtual Pathway gathering, 1/3 of all students. Think about the opportunity that opened up by making Pathway truly scalable wherever the church is organized. If you're going to serve the hidden many, you better be focused on access. Academically and spiritually, what's something that the Pathway Connect curriculum builds in all of our students? Confidence. It was the #1 reason we found, it wasn't actually even cost and affordability. The #1 reason we believe most of the students didn't start into college is they didn't think they could, right? The curriculum is designed to build confidence early on. The application is designed to be simple. You don't have to have a GED. You don't have to take the ACT. You don't have to take the TOEFL exam if you're an international student, right? You don't even have to have an ecclesiastical endorsement to start. You commit to striving toward living the honor code. That opened access to students all across the church. Now, it also meant with greater access, what do you think happened to the risk profile of the students in the program? It went up dramatically, right? A lot of people will think when they look at a traditional U.S. university, or they look even here at BYU Idaho on this campus, and they'll say, well, we're open access. Well, actually, to apply to BYU Idaho, you have to take the ACT. You have to get a certain score on the ACT, even though it's an inclusive score. You have to take the test, and you have to meet that threshold. You have to speak English at a TOEFL level that's much higher than Pathway, and you have to have an ecclesiastical endorsement, and you have to have probably thought you were going to go to college. That's going to lead to a very different profile than the hidden many, right? And so with greater access came greater risk. And so you can't just focus on access, you also have to focus on completion. And there, we heard the insight on having shorter programs. You have to have programs that will lead to completion earlier because students aren't going to make it all the way. Finally, if you're Everywhere the church is organized, you also have to be embedded in the church in a way our traditional universities haven't been. While they've been an asset of the church, a resource to the church, they haven't been embedded in the church structure itself, with church service missionaries, with area presidencies, with area plans, with the self-reliance program. All of these things have a fit between them that increasingly make BYU Pathway very different than what many of us experience in our own college experience. And one of the invitations we have to you as you teach students about the program is to understand these differences. And when a student says, well, why do we start with certificates? Why do we do this life skills course? Why is the degree structure this way? We hope you'll be able to say, well, BYU Pathway was built to help you succeed in a way a traditional university really wasn't designed to do. And I like to just give you a little profile of our students, what we call the hidden many. They have different admission requirements. I already mentioned this, right? And you know this, you see them, you work with them, you know this is different. I don't have to, sometimes with other academics, I have to really try to describe how the students are different than the students on a campus. If you've been a Pathway missionary, you know this, right? There's a much higher percentage of first-generation students, like 3 to 5 times higher than even the most open of our campuses in the church educational system. Higher percentage of lower-income students, which dramatically increases the risk profile. Prominence of adult learners, we talked about that earlier. Many of them work full-time because of that. Their experience is fully online. They can't walk into the counseling center and get help. They can't go talk to the professor after class and get help. Everything has to happen through an online mechanism. Their pacing's different. Because they're adult learners, because they work full-time, because they're moms, they aren't taking a full credit load of a traditional residential campus. I want to show you some data, and the idea here is that access is not equal to completion. I just showed you we have a disproportionate number of students from higher risk categories. This is just one way to look at risk. On the vertical axis is the income quartile a student's parents were from. This is in the United States. What percentage of students in the United States who start college complete college? What do you think the percentage is? Across all university average. What? 30%. It's a little higher than 30. It's lower than 50. 43%. That's the average. Which means more than every other student who starts college in the United States does not complete college. Now, we could talk about that for a long time. But our population isn't the average. Our population is disproportionately first generation and lower income. What do you think the percent, if the average, by the way, in 1965, if your parents were in the top quartile, your odds of graduating college in 6 years were 40%. That number's grown to a whopping 58%. Again, I don't think anyone in higher education should be writing home about this success story, but it has increased, and it is higher than the bottom quartile. If it's 58% for the top quartile, what do you think it is for the lowest income quartile student? 25? I mean, we think it's going to be lower, right? 11%. I mean, this is a tragedy. It's even a crisis. It means 1 in 10 American students who go to college don't graduate in a 6-year window. 90% don't graduate, almost 90% in a 6-year window. This, by the way, is disproportionately the students who we serve in BYU Pathway. Okay, so now I want to link this to degree structure and why we have a unique degree structure in the BYU Pathway program. A degree structure most of our Pathway missionaries themselves didn't go through, but I hope you'll see, for us, a critical adjustment to the traditional degree structure for our students. with no trade-offs. And that's the counterintuitive part I'm going to hopefully walk you through here. This is the Mexico City pathway cohort I met with in 2015. When I left BYU Idaho in 2009, we had piloted the pathway program. We had intuitively realized we'd probably want to start with certificates. And we started to design some certificates. But at that time, the curriculum went through the traditional university degree structure that's here on the campus of BYU Idaho. I left for 5 years. I came back in 2015. In those 5 years, guess how many certificates BYU Idaho awarded to students who come through the pathway program? You don't have to think a long time because it's not very high. If you think for about 5 seconds, you'll have a second for every certificate. Six certificates in the 5 years I was gone. We knew this was a fundamental part of our program, but we were working through traditional degree structures. Right as I arrived, we realized this gap in the certificate orientation of the program intellectually. But I showed up in Mexico City, and here I am in the back of that group with John Linford, who's the vice president of online. And the stake president there said, President Gilbert, we love the Pathway program. I mean, it has been transformational in the lives of the students who've gone through it. He said they walk with more confidence. In his case, they can speak better English. They have a spiritual depth to them they didn't have at the start of the program. They're excited to go on with their education. Many of them get better jobs. But I have in our stake, in just one stake, over 40 or 50 students who are stuck at 35 credits. How many credits for a bachelor's degree? 120, okay? And he said they're stuck at 35 credits. They're never gonna make it to the bachelor's degree because they're different. They're adult learners, they need something different. They're working full time. They're mothers, they have church callings. And they're sitting there going, how in the world am I gonna get through 120 credits? And he's like, hey, I mean, I'm not gonna tell you how to do your job, but he was basically saying, you're designed wrong, right? And we came back from that, and I pointed to Brother Linford and I said, we will have a certificate first program for you and for your students, and they'll be able to finish it in 1 year, okay? Now, I want to show you, this is the structure of the degree program and pathway. If you want any sense of how committed we are to this degree structure that starts with Pathway Connect, goes first to a certificate, then to associates, then to the bachelor's, come to our headquarters in Salt Lake. You'll see this logo painted on the wall. Like, we aren't moving from this degree structure anytime soon. We're so committed to a certificate first because we know our students and we know the risk profiles I just showed you in that data. Okay, this is a map of the value of a traditional university over time. And in the freshman and sophomore year, there's often very little value outside of the learning they got on campus. But if they stop, one of the worst profiles is some credit, no degree. That's the highest risk profile for loan default, by the way, because you've lost the opportunity cost of college, you've paid money, and you have no better job prospects. And then why does it accelerate right at the end in most traditional university settings? But why does the job prospect get better only and not until the end? Because taking courses that get you okay, yeah, someone said degrees, but I want to focus on what is it Lester? Leister said. It's not just that you have a degree. The university has held back the job-relevant curriculum until the junior and senior year. So even before we talk about the signal value of a degree in the job market, we haven't even been teaching you job-relevant curriculum through your whole first and second year. What in most universities do you spend most of your freshman year doing? What? General education. By the way, if you wanted to systematically, if you wanted to replicate this data Just send a first-generation college student from the bottom quartile to college and enter them into the GE curriculum of any university, right? For the first time, what are they doing likely? So the first time you're writing a check to pay for school, you're actually spending money. And then you're in general education courses, which are likely hard and ambiguous to you, given your family and economic background. And you say, this is not very relevant. And I'm paying for this. And what do you think it does to first generation lower income students? It decimates their persistence. And in fact, most of the dropout for this demographic happens in the first year. So those students are dropping out of college at the very time college has given them almost no value once they leave, right? What we've done at BYU-Pathway is inflect that curve. So not only have we straightened the relationship between more education and value in the job market, we've inflected it. The BYU-Pathway Certificate First model says we're going to put into the first year immediately relevant job skills training that if you leave and you drop out early, instead of dropping out back here but with no value, you're going to drop out here with lots of value in the job market. By the way, our placement rate for the certificates is over 70%. 70% get a better job at the time of completing their certificate. Now, is it as good as a job as if they had their bachelor? No way. Is it better than being a college dropout job prospects? Absolutely. So when someone asks you, why are we starting with certificates? I hope you'll think about this chart and think about the decision we've made at BYU-Pathway to serve the hidden many, a different population. Now, let me show you one more way of thinking about it. There are job certificates out there that are terminal. What does that mean? It's a terminal certificate. You do the certificate and you're done, and it doesn't count for anything else. And they actually have really good job placement, and they're not expensive, and they can be done in 1 or 2 years. But that's as good as it will be. And you have applied technical programs across the world, in the United States and beyond, that are not enrolled because even though they have good job placement and good salary prospects, once a student's told you have no upside potential, think how motivating that is, right? Then we have traditional education programs at most universities that start with GE and what's the next thing? Prerequisites. Like, how many of you have ever hired someone before? Okay, do you go out and say on the job posting, I'm looking for someone with some GE and prerequisites. Send me all the GE and prereq students. That's who I want, right? And so they're not marketable, and at their first generation and lower income, they're probably saying, why am I doing this? I love Pathway Connect, but like only a few who maybe knew what they were getting into stay with us. But the ones who don't go right in the certificate are more likely to drop out. And way out there is the bachelor's degree, okay? BYU Pathway has said, no, Pathway Connect goes right into a certificate, then an associate's degree, then a bachelor's degree. Our persistence rates on students before they get their certificate is about 67%. What do you think happens to the persistence rate? We started the certificates because we knew students wouldn't make it to 120 credits, right? And so we had to have an off-ramp that was value early. But what do you think happens to our persistence rate for students who complete a certificate? It goes up. Look at this jump, 85%. Why do you think it goes up once they get a certificate? Motivation, why? What changes?
They're more confident they can do it.
Okay, so they got this interim recognition of progress, and they're like, I did it. I made it to the certificate. Do you think that's important for first generation, lower income students who don't come from a tradition of education? Why else do you think this goes up?
They see the value of their education.
They see the value. We've been reading quotes from the church leaders that say, get all the education you can get. For members of the church, education is a spiritual responsibility. Or how about this one from Elder Uchtdorf? For members of the church, an education is not just a good idea, it's a commandment. Right? And so we're reading these through Pathway Connect, and they're like nodding their head. But then they get a better job at a rate of 70%, and all of a sudden they say, oh, got it. And now the relationship between more education and not just spiritual but temporal blessings becomes much more intuitive for the student to keep going. This is a powerful, powerful set of data. We also have a campaign called Give Me 5. This is, when you get done with Pathway Connect, I want you to take 5 more courses. That doesn't sound too far out there, does it? As opposed to you get done with Pathway Connect, and what's 120 divided by 85? Someone help me out. I must not have taken that Pathway Connect math course. So I'll do 105 minus the 15 credits divided by 3. Give me 35. That just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? So give me 5, just 5 more courses. Johnny, good job, you're completing this semester, Pathway Connect. Now go on and give me 5 more courses, you're gonna be marketable. 5 more courses, you're gonna be positioned to get a better job. Oh, you're working full-time? How would you like to be working full-time at a 25% pay increase, right? Internationally, the certificate completion typically leads to a doubling of income. Domestically, it leads to about a 25% lift in income and more often full-time employment. So Johnny, give me 5. And our advising program needs to line up around that. Our student grad plan, which by the way, they're gonna fill out in the coming semesters during Pathway Connect. And it will help you build your grad plan around the next 5 courses you're gonna take, okay? We have here Brother Peck, who's the Dean of Online Programs, who's helped architect these certificates. By the way, when you create a certificate, you can't just take the first 5 courses of a major. That's what we do if we were a traditional university. If we're BYU Pathway, the first 5 courses have to have a job skill in them. So they're not prereqs, right? They have an independent freestanding job skill. And we've created what we call gateway certificates, which are the first ones you take, which are not as advanced as your junior and senior level certificate courses, but they're going to be gateway courses that help you get a job skill right away. I want to show you what some of our students have said. So when you get a question like this one from Megan Downward, just earlier this week, Megan said, if your plan is to complete a bachelor's degree, this is, by the way, on the online student portal that we have students help each other answer questions in the online student community on Facebook. She says, if your plan is to complete a bachelor's degree, so Sister Downward saying, yeah, great, I've heard about this certificate first thing, but I'm going here. My plan is not to stop at a certificate. So here's her question. What's the purpose of doing certificates first versus getting the general education and foundation courses done before moving into my major classes? By the way, like probably every one of us did, right? And that's a risk we have with the church service missionaries in Pathway is this is how we learned, right? The problem is it's a really bad design. I hope you can see that from what I just showed you, especially for our student profile, okay? So Megan asked this question. I'm not going to show you all the comments, but I want to show you what some of the students said back to Megan. I couldn't have been more proud of some of these responses, okay? Raul Laredo Soria from Bolivia. He says, for us in Bolivia, certificates are a great blessing because sometimes we don't have enough money or time for continuing our education. But if we have a certificate, we can show that what we studied in the USA in areas like applied technology that are more than enough the certificate is more than enough for finding a good job. okay? So that's in Bolivia. But how about Kimmy Weldon right here in the United States? Kimmy says, I dropped out of community college 15 years ago, so one of the stop outs, which is a lot of our students, especially our 30-plus students, okay? I dropped out of community college 15 years ago. You're going to see here's the failure of the U.S. higher education system. 2 semesters before finishing my associates. Okay, so she dropped out right before her associates. How do you think the rest of higher education, when she tried to later finish, viewed those credits? Do you think it was easy to get those credits? She says, I have nothing to show for it except for a pile of transfer credits that will get me done a smudge faster with my bachelor's degree at BYU, Idaho. You better believe I'm collecting as many certificates as I can along the way, because they are a concrete finished thing that I can put on my resume so that if life explodes again, before I finish the long haul BS program, I have something I can lean on to get a job with. Okay, that's powerful. And that's not us having to explain it, it's the students. Here's a learning model working, right? Let's look at another one. Pan Huffaker says, some companies will hire you with a certificate in a specific area. You can use those courses to continue on to your bachelor's. Ann Hagen Rocher says, many people who drop out early for whatever reason, everyone thinks they're going to finish, but many who drop out for whatever reason have nothing to show for their education except the money they're out. If you get a certificate, you are more likely to use your schooling for a job. And then Jolene Bullock says, this. That's the answer, right? So not all students see this. In fact, maybe Megan didn't see it coming in. And one of the things we need your help on is to teach this. And for some of our missionaries, it may be different than what you experienced. You know, I showed up in college at BYU and I loved my general education courses, but my parents had done it before me and them before them. And so when I got in there and started reading, you know, Beowulf and poetry and doing algebraic substitution and calculus, it didn't matter that wasn't relevant because I knew. But our pathway students don't know that. And you get them into a certificate. Does certificate take any more time to your degree completion? Doing a certificate first? No. In fact, by the way, to show you how hard this is, one of our own leaders in BYU-Pathway in the President's Council said, well, in fact, he asked almost Megan's question, well, if we do certificate first, that's fine, but we have some students who want to start right on their bachelor's degree. What's wrong with that sentence? You are starting on your bachelor's degree when you do a certificate first, okay? So we need your help in this, all across the program. Let me just summarize certificate first curriculum. It accelerates value right away. First means first. I was meeting with another university president and this president's leadership council, and they're like, oh yeah, we want to do certificates, but it's a side thing done later because your degree isn't relevant. No, first means first, and it's where we start. It's still bachelor's focused. We're not abandoning the bachelor's. In fact, we're not abandoning general education, but we're resequencing them. It's stackable and modular, so it builds, every certificate builds into the associate's and bachelor's degrees. Stackability doesn't mean it's employable. For us, the certificates we offer our students, and you can with confidence say, go into the new grad plan, which is built just for the BYU Pathway students, right? And our grad plan, unlike the traditional university grad plan, starts out and you fill out your certificate. That's the first thing you see. That's not true at most universities. Even if you have certificates, it's not first means first. And they go into their grad plan and they fill out the 5 courses, give me 5, to finish their first certificate, right? And you can tell them, fill out your grad plan, and the certificate that you have in there is going to lead to a job. And in fact, if it doesn't, please give them Kendall Peck's home number. It requires aligned advising. So we're building all the advising structures to point students in the certificates, right? We can't do this by coaxing them into it or saying, hey, why don't you do this, when they can still go in their grad plan and fill out their GE, right? They're going in now and they're doing their certificate first. That's going to be in the grad plan. It will be in our advising centers, and we hope it will be messaged from all of our Pathway missionaries. And the other thing you can remind them is, you're more likely to finish your bachelor's degree because you do a certificate first. Now, I just want to close with a couple thoughts. First, from Elder Holland. Elder Holland made this statement at a BYU Pathway devotional broadcast to the entire world. By the way, the idea of broadcast for BYU Pathway doesn't make a lot of sense because, we're in every time zone in the world. So, but we did a live webcast and then made it available to students to watch it. After the fact, Elder Holland, Elder Bednar, Elder Cook, Sister Bingham, and Elder Gay, who all sit on the executive committee, you saw the devotional. And you may remember from that night, Elder Holland saying this, reflecting on what's happening in the BYU Pathway. He says, we're part of a monumental moment in the church education, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is one of those pivotal marks in our history that we won't fully understand until we look back at it, and maybe decades from now. You're here while this is happening. You're making this happen with the students you serve. This is a monumental moment in the church educational system. It's unlike anything any of us could have conceived of. Think about it, 10 years ago, this program didn't exist. Today there are almost 50,000 students, and we have a church leader saying you're growing way too slow, Clark. Right? And Elder Holland saying this is a monumental moment in church education. And the last quote I want to share with you is from President Nelson. We present our 5-year plan for all the church educational programs, BYU, BYU-Idaho, BYU-Hawaii, LDSBC, and BYU-Pathway, once a year to the Church Board of Education. And I was going through the BYU-Pathway plan with the First Presidency and talking about the degree structure, talking about certificate first, talking about how we're working with area presidencies, with the welfare and self-reliance programs of the church. And President Nelson cut me off midway and said this to me, and I'd share it with all of you. He said, Clark, you aren't just educating individuals, you're changing the church. I hope you understand this is a sacred responsibility. And he said that in a way as if he almost worried I didn't understand. And yes, this is an innovative thing, and yes, more students are coming into it. And yes, you're working with an amazing group of students in your Pathway gatherings. But I hope you'll take time to reflect as you serve as Pathway missionaries all across the church, to realize you aren't just educating individuals, you aren't just working with that one cohort. You're changing the church. And as President Nelson said, it's a sacred responsibility. I have a testimony that what we're doing matters. I have a testimony that what we're doing is building the kingdom of God on the earth. And at this time is preparing the church for the return of the Savior. That you can see that happening all across the church. And one of the resources the Lord has poured out at this time and season is education through what's happening in BYU Pathway. You're part of that. You're a foundational part of that. I hope you feel that. I hope you know how grateful we are for what you do and what a critical part you play in this program, having the impact it's going to have on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Amen. Now we'd like to take a few minutes and just, if you have any questions, let's just talk through them together. Just a few questions.
President Gilbert, could you talk about why many of the degrees are applied degrees? And does that mean that they're less or viewed as less in the industry or in higher education? Yeah, great. And maybe what I can do is talk about both. Why do we have the degrees we have and why are they applied? Given what I talked about, the strategy of BYU Pathway, we know degrees have to be applied in nature and they have to lead to jobs.
And we've actually spent the last several years with Kendall Peck and Kevin Shiley traveling all across the church, working with self-reliance managers in every area of the church, domestically, internationally. And we looked at what degrees and also what certificates had the strongest placement in different areas of the church. We try not to offer degrees that only work in one area. For example, we love teacher education and we love nursing. Those fit a lot of our criteria. They're applied, they lead to good jobs, they actually fit with some of the principles of the gospel and caring for others and teaching and lifting people. But why would, given what I talked about our strategy, why do you think we wouldn't have nursing and teacher education in our standard offering? Why do you think? Remember, what's the second choice in our strategy? We have to work everywhere the church is organized. So we find degrees that work in South Africa and South Jordan, from Rigby to Rio, right? We try to find degrees that self-reliance managers in multiple geographies here in the United States and all across the church say those will work. We test them with employers. We've done employer interviews. We've done self-reliance interviews. And so, why do we offer applied degrees? We actually can tell our students the degrees we offer lead to jobs. We've tested them with employers. We've tested them with church self-reliance managers all across the church. You can feel confident these degrees will lead to jobs. The certificates we offer do the same. And not only do they lead to jobs, they lead to jobs immediately. And we won't offer every kind of program you might see at a university. Remember my commitment to the board. We're focused on access. So we're going to do things that lead to immediate jobs and then give you some very good paths to finish to your bachelor's degree. But we're not going to offer every bachelor's degree. It would cause us to violate our scalability rule. It causes us to violate our affordability rule. And in some cases, it would cause us to violate our applicability rule. So I hope that helps explain that a little bit. Any other questions?